Hello, everyone. Welcome once again to FreightWaves TV and the Transmission Show. My name's Sebastian Blanco. Over there, somewhere on your screen, is Grace Sharkey, my co-host. How are you doing today?
I am doing good. I got some golf in yesterday, got the nice forearm sunburn going. So Michigan is back. It's summertime, ready to roll.
It really is. It's we just skipped right through spring and just decided it's going to be 90 degrees right now. So I'm sweating. We're probably all sweating. Obviously the big news in electric vehicles recently has been the Ford F-150 Lightning, and now I can talk a little bit more about it. I hinted at it last week, but it's been great to see the news and people being excited about this truck. I really think there's a lot of potential here to change what people think about an EV, and for those of us like me who've been looking at this industry since 15 years now. It's rare that an EV has this much impact, this much attention. Obviously, Ford's promoting it themselves, but it's working. It's a cool thing, and so yeah, I'm excited to see what people think about it moving forward when they can actually get behind the wheel and check it out for themselves. Were you impressed with what you saw?
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the classic look of it. It's no like space rocket or like Tesla truck, so
Right.
Which makes sense. I think you're going to see a lot of contract workers getting that truck. So I loved it. I thought it was great. So I was excited that you finally got your chance to start talking about it this week.
Well, that's the good news. That's the exciting part. We have got a cool guest today. Coming to tell us a little bit more of some of the downsides and actually getting this thing into production, because we know everyone's dealing with all kinds of problems. So we'll get to him in just a moment. But first, a word from our sponsors.
When you switch to AIT Worldwide Logistics for automotive shipping, you're partnering with a team of logistics professionals in Asia, Europe, and North America who develop customized supply chain solutions that are just as unique as your business. Whether it's trans-border, hotshot trucking, express ocean service, or an exclusive air charter, AIT has the expertise, technology, and carrier connections to achieve your production goals every time. Check out their link in the show notes.
And speaking of AIT, with us on the line now, we have Alan Votaw, Director of Sales for Automotive and Industrial Verticals at AIT. Alan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
We're very excited to speak with you. Before we get into some of your thoughts on the supply chain and some of the problems that are coming up, or already here, really, why don't you give us a brief history of your automotive logistics background so everyone knows where you're coming from?
Sure. So I'm not to date myself, but it's 20 years plus in this space. Ever since I set foot in the freight forwarding world and the logistics environment, I've really always dealt with the automotive sector. Branched out maybe a year here or there, but really from managing tier supplier business down to or up to OEM business. This sector has been my passion and my hate for 20 plus years. So I've had the great fortune of growing up in Germany, starting my career over there, and then moving over here to the U.S., Atlanta in 1998, and since then I've been enjoying all the highlights and challenges that this industry sector brings with it, and I think we're in a great terribly challenging period, but I love every moment of it because every day presents a new challenge that needs to be mastered.
And if you've got that many years in the industry, I'm guessing you have tons of contacts, tons of people you reach out to, information. Obviously, in the supply chain world, everything's about the chip shortage right now. Everything's about like shipping problems. What is it that you're hearing from OEMs and the tier one customers about this whole situation right now?
Yeah, I mean, the chip shortage is the one making the news most and really impacting, the entire industry. It's not just the OEMs, it's the tier suppliers. I mean, the high-tech development in this space is really driving demand through the roof. And yeah, with a shortage, everybody's suffering. But it's not just the chip shortage. If you look across the news and the message board, just reading that there's an auto manufacturer shutting down next week for a couple of days because parts and components are also short. So it's not just the chip itself. And that's just an illustration of the perfect storm that we're experiencing right now in the different marketplaces, be it then domestic with equipment shortage and congestion, be it then on the international platform with the capacity constraints on air freight and the sea freight markets going haywire. So it is really a monumental challenge to keep materials flowing and lines running, and there are fallouts that we can see.
How do you see freight forwarders helping keep up with the past customer experience for these automotive companies, right? So how are you guys helping customers figure out new ways to move products around in order to make sure that once that car is requested, it is delivered in a appropriate amount of time?
That's a great question. There's certainly a gimmick, think outside of the box, but I think it's never been more true and necessary than in these days. I mean, forget about traditional ways of moving cargo. It's no longer, get it there just in time, just kind of get it there, right? And on the other hand, it was always get it there cost efficient or cost effective. The cost doesn't matter anymore, right? So, bottom line, I fundamentally believe, this is now also the time where it really then comes to light. Do you have the right level relationship and engagement with your customer? Yes or no? Because that's where it now pays dividends. In times where things are more stable, more predictive, I think it's fairly easy to manage business, and that's fine. But it's when things don't go right, it's when things are difficult, when the perfect storm is there. How are you engaging with your customers? How is the customer engaging with you? What are you doing to be not ahead of the curve, but look as far upstream as you can and manage all the challenges and difficulties that exist with minimal to ideally no impact to your production and your supply chain itself.
Alan, you brought up the just-in-time aspect, which I think is really important, especially in my experience. I've helped with transportations, logistics from a lot of the tier 1 facilities. And that just-in-time model can be really difficult for carriers to maneuver. A lot of the risk falls on them. How are you working with carriers in order to line up more capacity that would usually go against this just-in-time model and more of that like inventory stacking so that they are better prepared for future issues or shortages like we're currently seeing?
Yeah, that's a tough question to give a fully satisfactory answer to, maybe. I mean, it's almost like looking in the crystal ball. If I knew all the right elements, then I'd be in a different line of business. But essentially, it kind of goes back to the quintessential is information. How can I get credible, valid, good information as far upstream as possible? We talk about the forecasting process, and you see it in these days and times, even on the ocean side. Carriers will demand predictive and accurate forecasting, and will hold you to it. Right? It's no longer if I have more, that's good as well. No, it's not. So that brings a lot of the challenges with it, right? So we're looking at very, constricted markets where capacity isn't available in abundance, quite to the contrary. And the way we deal with carriers and the information we're sharing, they're binding. So again, it goes back to where the order is placed. It's with the customer. And again, what type of information, what type of dialogue, and how are you managing that forecasting process with your customer, so that you can, as a forwarder and service provider, then get all the carriers lined up along the chain and make sure that you are doing the proper planning, that you're executing to plan, that you're not overcommitting, that you're not undercommitting in that space as well. Because anything of that just spells disruption, spells delay, and the end consequence is material's not going to be there at the point of use in time.
One of the things we wanted to ask you, and we brought up the Lightning electric truck ahead of time, was moving into the EV space more and more. The industry as a whole is the idea about like shipping batteries can be a problem for some shippers, and other companies. I remember many years ago when Formula E was getting started, they had a hard time moving the vehicles from race to race because they were doing them all over the world. because you can't just throw these cars and the extra battery packs onto the same, shipping containers that you use for everything. It has to be very carefully, managed, and everyone has to know what's in all these things. But what can you tell us a little bit about how electric vehicles are impacting the supply chain for automotive customers right now?
Well, everybody's building them now, so they've gone mainstream, right? Tesla years ago was a trendsetter, at least in my personal point of view. But then you had the startup wave, and then if we would have talked 2.5 years ago, it would have still been a buzzword. It's mainstream today. You look at all the big companies, especially on the traditional OEM side, there's massive investments, and the strategy forward-looking is all electrified. So the demand curve is already exponentially increasing, and that's specific for the electric ion lithium batteries. The challenge with that is the transportation networks and the capacity to support the sourcing and shipping from mainly overseas producers is just not on the same par. So you have more demand than actual capacity, and the capacity question is easily answered. From a carrier point of view, nobody likes this stuff. Right? It's hazardous material. It can be lethal, and it poses a great risk to any ocean or air carrier. To answer your question earlier with the Formula E, the whole reason it becomes challenging for teams to ship all the equipment at one given point in time is you have to find multitude of carriers to then spread these shipments and volumes out to, because not one single carrier wants to expose themselves to the risk. So I think that's also the big reason why there is a push for localization, not just here in North America. You look also in Europe, massively investments in the strategy of the European Union is to have, I think by 2024, 33% of the battery demand satisfied by local sourcing and local production. Today, Asia is dominating the market. Japan, Korea, and China are the three largest battery manufacturers, but that by default spells it has to go on the water or it has to go in the air to satisfy the overseas production needs, right? And that's just a challenge.
You brought up the fact that moving this type of stuff can be difficult for carriers, and so I'm interested on your thoughts. If we do bring it in domestically, we already do have such a shortage, right, on available trucking capacity. Do you see it being set up kind of like how Tesla has, a lot of production at one site, or do you see maybe specialized carriers coming out of the woodwork that haul this material more frequently because of the volume that's brought in? How are you looking at that segment?
My personal read on this is I think it's going to be both a little bit, because if you look at where currently battery manufacturing sites are being ramped up, it's in geographical proximity to multiple car makers. Right. So, but that obviously with itself brings in the need and the challenge that they need to be transported for the last mile. So I think there's also an opportunity for a niche to evolve where you will have specialized carriers offering transportation services. But it'll also boil down to today there's limited regulations on how to properly manage storage and handle batteries. And I think as this now continues to evolve, I think a more robust set of rules and regulations will govern the transportation, not just for domestic trucking, but in particular also for ocean freight transport and air freight transport.
So sticking with the electrification angle, I know that another topic we wanted to get to was this idea that you had about what could be a major disruptor in the manufacturing space for EVs. And I'll just let you go ahead and describe it rather than, steal your thunder by asking specifically what it was that we know you wanted to talk about. So please.
Yeah, great. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm not sure if it's a major disruptor. I think the proof of concept will determine if it does. But, in the EV space, and you look at manufacturing, it definitely goes against traditional and mainstream manufacturing as we know it. Mainstream manufacturing is massive plants pushing out hundreds of thousands of units a year, huge capital expenditures, whereas the disruptor that is in the marketplace today in this space is looking at a completely different concept and focusing on micro manufacturing. So smaller footprint, quicker startup time, obviously smaller production numbers, but the flexibility and also being local to where the customer is, I think is a really exciting approach. And again, the proof is always in the pudding, but it seems to also be now from the key metrics point of view, also in terms of cost competitiveness, seems to really be a game changer. And obviously it has created some noise in the space because you have companies like a UPS and now Uber engaging with this company for future rollouts. So I think the next months and especially late quarter of this year, where the first units will be produced here in the U.S., will be very exciting. And I think can be a game changer and a trend center, similar to what Tesla was years ago with their first electric vehicle.
I 100% agree with that sentiment. It's interesting. You already see that like micro aspect hitting retail and hitting other supply chains through micro fulfillment, right? It's a way for them to be a little bit closer to the manufacturer, but also not have to worry about stacking up all of that inventory and being able to quickly. It's really about resiliency, being able to at any point kind of switch up the way that your supply chain is going to work. So when you talk about like the proof of concept, I think you already are seeing it work in other areas of logistics. So I definitely think you're right on the micro aspect of things. I think we all see that kind of coming to the whole industry. And
to add that, to that is, localization is going to be the key, right? So, and that's if you look at, these global and complex supply chains and just the volatility of it. This is just a great new way of looking at and doing things and relying on local sourcing and local manufacturing and local customers. Right?
Is that something that you think the electric vehicle manufacturing helps promote, or is that something that now that people are seeing what a global disruption can do, they're just looking for solutions? And it could have worked with ICE engines had this happened 20 years ago, but we're in the state we are in now, and EVs are much more of a thing. So does that help sort of the micro and modular manufacturing take off?
I'm not sure, because the economies of scale, that for me is always just the key question. I think maybe 5 or 10 years ago, nobody would have thought in this direction. And I think for mainstream, it still doesn't make sense. But if you look at a lot of the startups, and there are plenty out there, and also some renowned names, and not just always the same Tesla, they're adapting the strategy of kind of the legacy manufacturing, right? You look at, just throw out a couple names, but Rivian, you look at Lucid and others. They have massive investments in large production facilities, right? So I'm not sure if it kind of fits their way of thinking and strategy, but clearly now with company of arrival, they're thinking differently about this. I think their flexibility and nimbleness and their commitment to sustainability is also a huge factor that is driving this different approach to sourcing and manufacturing.
Alan, thank you for joining us today. We got time for one more quick question. From a freight forwarding perspective, what differences do you anticipate in terms of supply chain solutions, given these ideas, these much smaller manufacturing facilities versus the traditional large OEM facilities?
I think the opportunity and challenge will be you as a provider are going to have to be as flexible and as speedy as these startups are. In my personal experience in dealing with startups, just the pace at what they move at is just incredible. And I think the great opportunity for the logistics provider space is to really get in and partner up with these companies, because guess what? Whatever we've been used to dealing with the traditional OEM or the traditional tier supplier does not exist. So these people really need consulting, they need guidance, they need you to guide and weather the storm with them. And that's just for me a great opportunity to step in and look at this opportunistically from a moment perspective, but join the journey and really generate business and revenue streams long term.
All right. Well, Alan Votaw, thank you so much for joining us here in Transmissions today. It's been great speaking with you. And as we say every week, like, we learn so much from having great people on, and today was another great example of that, just really helping us understand what's going on out there. And hopefully people can make better decisions for the future as we try to figure all this out.
Well, thank you again for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. And Grace, thank you to you as well. Everyone else, we will talk to you next week.